We spent last year studying the Sermon on the Mount verse by verse. We call the course The Normal Christian Life because it's the only place in the Bible where Jesus goes into detail about what real Christianity looks like. What the truly born again believer looks like. This year, starting this weekend, we're going to launch into a very, very informative, I believe, enlightening, inspiring series called The War of the Worldviews. How many of you know we're in a war? And the war is spiritual. It's a conflict between two kingdoms. I'll call this first introductory session, Welcome to the War Zone. Welcome to the war zone. One of the scriptures you don't hear much, that Jesus said something in Matthew 10:34. He promised a war. He said, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword." Well, I thought the angel said, "Peace on earth, goodwill to men." Well, that's those that'll make peace. But Jesus was a realist. He knew that his kingdom was invading a world system that was opposed to him, and that there could be no compromise. And if you were here for the Sermon on the Mount study, you know the Christian life is not a life of compromise. It's all in. And we learned that as we went through that year of studies. But the war is on. I was thinking this week about how many wars we hear of. Think of this: culture wars, race wars, gang wars, tribal wars. We hear about class warfare and the war on women. The escalating problem with North Korea has many fearing that we're on the brink of another world war. Now, the question arises for the rational believer: why is there so much warfare in this world? Where does it all come from? And if you leave here with anything tonight, I want you to get a revelation that beyond all of the different distinctions and all the kinds of warfare, there's really one root. Freddie Davis, in his book, Worldview Wars, says, all wars have one element in common that exists at the most fundamental level possible. At the root of every kind of war is a faith system that deems it okay to fight the war. We could say it this way: at the root of every kind of war is a worldview that makes it okay to fight the war. He's saying the root cause of all warfare is different worldviews that make warfare inevitable. ISIS beheads people. I think we've seen the images. They behead Syrians, Egyptians, Christians, and even the other Muslims that they don't think are Muslim enough. Why? What a horrible thing to do. I mean, take people, make them kneel down and cut their heads off. Why? Because these people in their faith system have a worldview that believes that those who disagree with their religion are worthy of death. It's a belief they hold. America's enemies, some of them were China, North Korea, Iran, Soviet Union. War could break out any time. Why? Because these nations have faith systems that oppose the worldview that we hold. Different values, different ideas about how a nation should function. In our national politics, the Democrats are at war with the Republicans are at war with the Democrats. What's at the root of this conflict? Why can't they get along? Why can't they get anything done? Because at the root of the conflict and why they disagree is a different way of looking at the world. It's not just one issue. It's not just on this issue we disagree, on that one we disagree. They disagree on most everything because at the fundamental level, they see the world differently. Now, I could go on, but the point is made that all warfare is rooted in a system of faith called a worldview. What is a worldview? Gary DeMar says a worldview is the way a person looks at and evaluates the world in which they live. Two people can see the same thing or the same fact, such as the sonogram of an unborn child. I mean, we could put up a sonogram of an unborn child and you could have two people look at that. One just sees tissue. The other sees a person. And they're going to come into conflict because they have a different way of seeing the same fact. The first one fights for the mother's rights to abort the child. The second person will fight for the right of the child to live. One sees the whole issue as about the woman's right to choose. The other sees the same thing, but says that has a right to live. Different worldviews. Take it a step farther. These same two people will probably be at war over other things besides abortion because a person's worldview is comprehensive. Anything that you would hold about a particular issue is just a part of a larger system. You understand what I'm saying? You don't hold one thought here and then a random thought over there and a random thought over. If you really sit down and look at your decisions and why you think the way you do and why you do what you do, why you behave the way you do and react the way you do, it's because you have a system that we call a worldview. Freddie Davis says a worldview is a set of beliefs which define the way we understand reality, or we might say truth, or what is true. Our worldview affects everything we think about everything. This isn't maybe the greatest example, but I like to think of it as putting on a pair of sunglasses. When you put on the pair of sunglasses, it affects everything you see. It affects things up close, things far away. It affects things that maybe have different colors, but now they've taken on a shade. And it's consistent. It actually changes the way that you see everything. I love the song we sang tonight. Help me see things like you do. Help me see things like you do. That's a great line. I miss Charles Colson, the man who went to prison over the Watergate scandal and was born again to Christ in prison and came out and wrote some wonderful books and some amazing things that he did for Jesus. And I think I have all of his books. He said this, and he had a lot to say about worldview, by the way. Christians must understand the clash of worldviews that is changing the face of American society. Christians must understand the clash of worldviews that's changing the face of society. You see, before you get through with us this year, you're going to have a revolution in your soul and in the very way that you think. And you will go out of here hopefully every week, but by the end of the year, you're going to be so equipped and so armed and ready to do battle, because you're going to begin to see that, well, first of all, you're not fighting flesh and blood. Our warfare is not with flesh and blood. It's with the worldview that the flesh and blood holds. And so, well, let's identify the enemy here. Our enemy here is not people. You may be like me. You maybe watch the TV. You get so mad at some of these people and what they say and some of the stuff, these politicians and some of the things that come out of their mouths. You just want to take your shoe off and throw it at the TV. But see, God wants us, you said, to understand the process. There's a process a person goes to before they come to the point where they make those kind of statements, and it's been building in them for years. And you can't beat something with nothing. You can't bring down an unbiblical worldview unless you have a biblical worldview to bring it down with. How can we win a war if we don't even know what we're fighting? This thought came to me many times during the last administration, when many Christians, and I was frustrated myself, were frustrated with President Obama because he would not use the term radical Islamic terrorism. He just wouldn't do it. It was his policy. And he injected that policy into his cabinet and into the people that were following him and his leaders in Congress, the people who represented his side, none of them would say it. And it drove some people crazy. And the argument was, how can you beat an enemy, or how can you defeat an enemy you can't define? But I had to think, well, some of these same Christians who criticize Barack Obama because he can't identify and define the real enemy, can't define the real enemy God has called us to engage in the conflict, because they really haven't thought it through. They don't know that it's a worldview we're up against. Larry talked to Dr. Dobson this week, another amazing champion for the kingdom in this generation. He and Gary Bauer, in their book, Children at Risk, say, quote, "Nothing short of a great civil war of values rages today throughout North America. Two sides with vastly differing and incompatible worldviews are locked in a bitter conflict that permeates every level of society." Now, again, I have to say, Paul said, we wrestle not with flesh and blood. Our warfare is not with people. Our warfare is with the unbiblical worldviews that people hold that cause them to think and do and say what they think and do and say. Some of you may be thinking, this is going to be complicated. This is going to get deep. What do you think Jesus meant when he said, what's the great commandment? He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. I'm waiting for that. Mind. I'll love him with all my heart. I'll love him with all my soul. I'll love him with all my strength. But you love him with all your mind. See, my beef with cultural Christianity in America is that we don't love him with all our mind, because the minute something begins to sound like it's going to challenge us or stretch us or take us someplace we're not used to, we immediately go, well, let me go back to my little titty-tat sermonettes that make for Christianettes. That's right. Boy, I got a good joke to tell you, but I think I'll save it for next week. Okay. This guy was told, this Christian guy, doctor said, you're going to have a brain transplant. And he said, well, what's available? And he took him in a room, and it had a bunch of jars, with brains in them. And he said, of course, obviously you want a Christian brain. He said, well, what's available? And he said, well, this first one here, he says, this is a Baptist brain, and it's $5,000. And he said, now, if you have this brain, you will know that you are always right. And he said, well, what else do you have? He said, well, I have the second brain. It's $12,000. This is a Presbyterian brain. And he said, now, if you get this brain, and he said, you will know that everything is going to work out fine. You will know everything's cool. Whatever happens, it's in the sovereign plan of God. You'll have peace. He said, well, what, you have anything else? He says, yeah, I have one more. He said, now that was $12,000. He said, I have this brain here, but it's $25,000. And the guy said, $25,000? He said, this is the charismatic brain. And he says, why is it $25,000? He said, because it's never been used. Listen, I love the gifts of the Spirit. I love the feely goods. I love the moving of the Spirit, the presence of God. I get into all of that. I get all of that. But I sometimes wonder if we think that because we love that part of the experience, that we don't realize that God wants us to love him with all our mind. It's not just about miracles and just about prophecy and casting out devils. As great as all that is, folks, we could sit in our little meetings for the rest of our lives and enjoy the presence of God and have miracles and all that stuff, but we got to go. See, last year, this is the way God's ordered it. I didn't even think of this till after I'd got the word that this is what we were supposed to do. He said, I spent a year showing you what the normal Christian life is like. Now I'm going to show you what it's like to go out into the world. And that's an altogether different thing. Now, when they speak about incompatible worldviews, okay, it'd be like saying different faiths. I remember years ago, I was witnessing to a young man, and he said something like this: there are so many religions in the world, and all claim to be true. How can I know which one is right? And almost without thinking, that came out of my mouth, I said to him, you know what, really? Don't get confused. There's really, in God's sight, there's only two religions in the world. And he kind of blinked and looked at me, and he said, what do you mean? It's not that complicated. There's only two. In God's sight, there's the Christian biblical worldview, there's the Christian faith, and then there's all the other ones that seem like there's so many, but they're not. They're just have different names. But they're all opposed to Christ. Does that make sense? I don't know why. I just see that. I saw this years ago. I said, you know what? There's really not that many religions. If you look at all of them, because the religion of I don't even want to call it a religion, but the message of Jesus is so unique and so exclusive. Gary DeMar said this: we are really experiencing the conflict of two rival faiths. Christianity that teaches God is sovereign over all, and the variety of worldviews that teach that man is sovereign over all. I love how that simplifies things. I mean, who is in charge? Who has the final word? Our last message on the Sermon on the Mount, they were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one having authority. He taught them as God. I mean, when you come down to worldviews, it may seem like there's many, but there's only two. It's God's way or the highway. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the life. Read it this way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He uses the definite article, and it's there in the original Greek. He didn't say, I'm a way, a truth, and a life. This is what even Christians think. Well, there's many ways to God. There's many truths. He said, I am the way, the truth, the life. And then he really splits the log. He says, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Do you believe that or not? If you believe that, you have just put yourself on the side of the one who has drawn a line in the sand and said, it's me or nothing else. So you can look on the other side of the line and you're either with Jesus or you're with, it doesn't really matter what name you go by. Neutrality is not an option when it comes to worldviews. See, you have a worldview whether you know it or not. I never heard the term worldview. You have one. I mean, I hear things that medical people say. They say, well, you've got this in your body. I say, a medulla oblongata or whatever. I said, what the heck is that? I don't know what that is. Said, well, you have one. Well, that's a worldview. You may not have ever heard of it, but you've got one. And there's two, really, and neutrality is not an option. The biggest reason the church is losing the culture war is because it's hard to win a war when your troops are sitting on the sideline. The evolutionist worldview is still on the march in the classrooms. The socialist worldview is still on the march in the halls of Congress. The humanist worldview is still on the move in our movie theaters and our football stadiums. But the army of God is on bivouac or AWOL. We fight and win a skirmish here and there, but we're losing the war because so many churchgoers don't have a comprehensive biblical worldview to beat back the enemy. Barna Research says only 19% of Christians in the United States have a Christian worldview. Less than 1 in 5. See, the question that we talk about when we sit around in leaders' meetings is, how can there be so many professing Christians in our country? 75% of the people in America say they're Christian. That may shock you, but it's true. That means there's 3 that say they're Christian for every 1 that say they're anything else. And yet the culture wars are lost, and the nation's morality is sliding. And you say, well, how can this be? I'm telling you how it can be. You can go to church all you want, but until you have a foundation that's comprehensive, it's not just one little word here and I know this commandment over here. It's a worldview. It's a system of beliefs and thinking that once you see it, it's consistent. It's not contradictory. Charles Colson said the church's singular failure in recent decades has been the failure to see Christianity as a life system or worldview that governs every area of existence. And there's no compromise. There's no neutrality. Jesus said in Matthew 6:24, Sermon on the Mount, no man can serve 2 masters. He says, really, there's 2 masters. God and anything else. In Luke 23, Luke 11, he that is not with me is against me. How many of you see we talked about offensive, the offense of Christ, that he's a rock of offense. This is offensive stuff. How many of you have ever talked to people who say, you know what bothers me about you Christians? You say you're the only way. I don't say I'm the only way or we're the only way. I'm saying Jesus is the only way because that's what he said. He's the only way. He said it. I wouldn't. Frankly, I would be feel weird to say I'm the only way or I know the only way. I just have to keep pointing at him and what he said. He just said, I'm the way. He that is not with me is against me. If someone says, I'm not religious at all, Jesus says, you're against him. If someone says, I think there are many ways to God, Jesus says, you're against him. If someone says, I choose not to make a choice, Jesus says, well, that is a choice. He makes it simple. You remember choosing teams on the playground when you were a kid? Boy, I remember this so vividly. We would go out to play baseball or volleyball, pick up sides, choose sides. You didn't have 3 sides. You had 2 sides. That's the way the war is. Greg Bonson says, quote, there is therefore no area in the world, in thought, in word, or in deed, which is irrelevant, indifferent, or neutral toward God and his demands. This war is about who runs the world. He says, no demilitarized zone exists between the camp of unbelief and the forces of obedience to Christ. God either owns everything or nothing. Every area of life and every fact of life are what they are because of God's sovereign decree. And so there is no place a man can flee in order to escape the influence, control, and requirements of God. In God's world, neutrality is impossible. All right, let me close. I'm going to let you go because I don't want to blow your mind out tonight, okay? I want to hang on. Where did Jesus talk about worldviews? Because somebody said, well, you're kind of quoting these different books and things, and you said something about he came to bring a sword and all that, That's a great question, and I asked that, and the answer came pretty quickly. There is a place where it was in the Sermon on the Mount. I didn't make a big deal out of it because I knew we were going to be coming to this, but he said something about the eye, how you see things. Remember in Matthew 6, 22, 23, I'm going to hurry on. Your eye is a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is good, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is bad, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep the darkness is. Now watch this. The metaphor is the eye, the lamp of the body. He says there's 2 kinds, just 2. There's the good eye and the bad eye. And he says the good eye fills your whole body with light. In other words, if you have a biblical worldview, if you see things as God sees them through the authority of his word, it's like putting on those sunglasses. It affects everything you see, every idea, every concept. It informs every decision that you make. It informs morals and ethics and what the movie is really saying that you go see. Instead of just watching the story, say, what's in the basement? Where did that come from? I want to show you some things that are going on in the culture that's it'll amaze you that these movies, even the ones that you may enjoy and I may enjoy that have a good story, they come with a message that's underneath the storyline. It's built in, and it's not an accident. It is in there. Even if the people who write the movie and make the movie and direct the movie have no idea that it's there, it's there. I mean, the Star Wars has made $1 gazillion, but the message is that the real power in the universe is a pantheistic force. It's there. It's all about lining up with the force. Now, I'm not slamming Star Wars. I've enjoyed some of the Star Wars movies, but I don't look at that without knowing. I've got the eyes to see, okay, that's a movie. I could enjoy the story at one level, but I see the worldview that's behind that. And it has captured a generation of young people who are absorbed with it. Okay, good eye, bad eye, got to get out of here. Hallelujah. If the light you think you have is darkness, how deep is that darkness? See, you and I are going to go out of here tonight, and we're going to go to our homes. We're going to enjoy the rest of our weekend. But Monday morning, we're going to be back out there. And we're going to be dealing with people who have bad eyes. The God of this world has blinded your eyes. And the scary thing is they think they've got the light. That's what we're up against. Do you know how to deal with that? There's ways that God can equip us to deal with it. Jesus said, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Well, we've got the second part right. We're harmless as doves. May the Lord make us wise as serpents.